Before we begin, I want to take a quick moment to talk to you directly. If you want the full continuation of these stories, more uncensored 18-plus ancient BL content, extended scenes, and unlimited royal forbidden romance, you can join us on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. YouTube does not allow us to show or monetize everything freely here, so the deeper, darker, and more intense versions, the ones where the tension finally breaks, are waiting for you there. You can find the link in the description and the pinned comment. Come join the family. Now, take a deep breath. Let the modern world fade away. Listen to the rain hitting the curved clay tiles of the imperial roof. Let the story begin. The first thing I realized when I woke up was that the floor was freezing. Not just cold, freezing. The kind of bone-deep, ancient cold that seeps up through the stone and tells your body that it is actively dying. I opened my eyes, and the world was a blurry wash of gray shadows and the iron-heavy scent of dried blood. My blood. Or rather, the blood of the body I was currently occupying. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. In my previous life, I had been an emergency room surgeon. I was used to waking up to alarms, to blood, to the scent of antiseptic and death. I was used to high-stakes survival. But the last thing I remembered was the screech of tires on wet asphalt, a blinding flash of headlights, and then, nothing. And now, here I was, lying on a bed of damp straw in what looked to be an imperial dungeon, wearing the torn remnants of black silk robes. As my mind struggled to catch up with my reality, the memories hit me. They didn't trickle in. They crashed into my skull like a falling boulder. His name was Shen. He was 23 years old. He was the personal shadow guard, the loyal dog, the unrequited, desperately pathetic lover of the Crown Prince of the Yan Empire, Prince Li Wei. Shen had loved the prince since they were teenagers. He had taken poison for him, taken arrows for him, slept outside his door in the freezing snow just to be near him. And how did the prince repay him? With cruel, beautiful smiles, with casual touches that meant nothing to the prince but everything to Shen, and, ultimately, with betrayal. 2 days ago, the prince's new fiancée, a noble daughter of a powerful general, had staged a fall into the lotus pond and blamed it on Shen, claiming the shadow guard had pushed her out of jealousy. Prince Li Wei hadn't even asked Shen for his side of the story. He had simply looked at the man who had bled for him for 10 years, his eyes flat and cold, and ordered, 50 lashes, throw him in the lower cells until he remembers his place. The original Shen had died down here. He hadn't died from the wounds on his back, though they were severe. He had died because his heart had simply stopped wanting to beat. The sheer, suffocating weight of the prince's betrayal had crushed his will to live. He had closed his eyes, let out a final, shuddering breath, and slipped away into the dark. And somehow, somewhere in the cosmic shuffle of souls, I had slipped in. I lay there on the cold stone, breathing in the damp air. I felt the agonizing sting of the lashes across my back. I felt the residual, echoing heartbreak of the original Shen, vibrating in my chest like a struck tuning fork. I took a breath, then another. Well, I whispered into the dark, my voice cracking from dehydration. That's tragic, but I'm not you. I did not inherit Shen's desperate love for a man who treated him like dirt. I inherited his calloused hands, his terrifying martial arts muscle memory, and a back full of infected wounds. But the love? That dissolved the moment my soul anchored to this flesh. I slowly pushed myself up. Pain flared. Hot and brilliant, but pain is just a nerve signal. It's information. I analyzed it, boxed it up, and forced my legs under me. The heavy iron door of the cell groaned open. A palace eunuch stood there, flanked by 2 guards. The eunuch looked down at me with a mixture of disgust and pity. "The Crown Prince summons you," the eunuch sneered. "He says if you have reflected on your sins and are ready to apologize to Lady Hua, you may return to your duties." The original Shen would have wept. He would have dragged his bleeding body to the prince's feet, kissed the hem of his golden robes, and begged for a forgiveness he didn't even need. I just blinked, adjusting to the torchlight. "I need a fresh uniform," I said. My voice was raspy but perfectly steady, and a medical kit. "I cannot bleed on His Highness's carpets. It's a pain to wash out." The eunuch stared at me, his jaw dropping slightly. Surprise. It's a funny thing to witness when people expect you to be broken. An hour later, I was standing in the Crown Prince's private chambers. The room was suffocatingly opulent. Heavy crimson silks draped from the ceiling. The air was thick with the scent of amber and sandalwood, a smell that used to make the original Shen's pulse race with adoration. To me, it just smelled like an expensive headache. I had bandaged my own back. I had washed the grime from my face. I stood in the corner of the room, dressed in the crisp, dark gray uniform of a shadow guard, my hands clasped loosely behind my back, my eyes fixed on a spot on the wall exactly 2 inches above the prince's head. Prince Li Wei was sitting at his low mahogany desk, reading a scroll. He was undeniably beautiful. I'll give the original Shen that. He had great taste in facial aesthetics. The prince had sharp, aristocratic features, ink-black hair cascading over broad shoulders, and eyes the color of dark jade. He radiated power, arrogance, and the kind of careless grace that only comes from never being told no in your entire life. He didn't look up for a long time. It was a power play, a classic manipulation tactic meant to make me sweat, to make me break the silence with an apology. I didn't mind. The silence gave me time to mentally review the anatomy of the human hand to distract myself from the throbbing in my back. Finally, Li Wei set the scroll down. He leaned back, crossing his arms, his dark jade eyes sweeping over me. He expected to see trembling shoulders. He expected to see dog-like devotion shining through tear-filled eyes. Instead, he saw a man standing as still as a statue, breathing evenly, utterly unbothered. "Have you learned your lesson, Shen?" Li Wei's voice was smooth, deep, and laced with a condescending warmth, the voice of a master scolding a favored pet. "Yes, Your Highness," I replied. My tone was perfectly flat, professional, polite, completely devoid of warmth. Li Wei frowned slightly. The micro-expression was fascinating. It was the look of a man who pressed a piano key and heard the wrong note come out. "You will go to Lady Hua's courtyard this afternoon and bow to her. You will apologize for your clumsy behavior," he commanded, watching my face closely. The original Shen would have choked on a sob. He would have pleaded, "But Your Highness, I didn't touch her. I swear it." I simply bowed from the waist, stopping just before the pull on my stitched back became unbearable. "As you command, Your Highness. I will issue the apology at precisely 3 o'clock. Will there be anything else?" Silence stretched across the room. It was thick, suddenly heavy. Li Wei stood up. He walked slowly around his desk, his golden robes whispering against the polished wooden floor. He stepped into my personal space. He was taller than me by a few inches, and he used it to loom. I didn't flinch. I didn't hold my breath. I just looked at his chin. He reached out and grabbed my chin, forcing my face up so I had to look into his eyes. His fingers were warm, his grip firm. "You are acting strange," Li Wei murmured, his gaze searching my eyes for the familiar, pathetic longing he was so used to seeing. "Are you pouting? Are you angry with me, Shen?" I looked into his dark jade eyes. I searched my own chest for a spark of anger, of hurt, of love. Nothing. It was hollow, clean, and wonderfully quiet. "I am not angry, Your Highness," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "I am simply awaiting your orders." His thumb stroked my jawline. It was a manipulative, sensual gesture, something he used to do to keep the original Shen on the hook, tossing him crumbs of affection to keep him starving for more. I felt a mild annoyance, like a fly buzzing near my ear. I took a slow, deliberate half-step backward, smoothly pulling my chin out of his grasp. I didn't swat his hand away, I didn't glare, I just stepped back into the professional distance required between a guard and a royal. "If that is all, Your Highness, I will go prepare for my afternoon duties," I said, bowing again. Li Wei's hand hung in the air for a second, empty. His eyes darkened. A flicker of real confusion mixed with a sudden, sharp irritation crossed his perfect face. "Go," he snapped, turning his back to me. "Yes, Your Highness." I walked out of the room. I didn't look back. When I went to Lady Hua's courtyard that afternoon, she was surrounded by her maids, sipping tea and looking incredibly smug. She expected a scene. She expected me to grit my teeth, to glare, to show my broken heart. I walked up to her, knelt on one knee with textbook military precision, and recited a perfectly hollow, grammatically flawless apology for my unacceptable clumsiness. I didn't look at her with hatred. I looked at her the way I would look at a piece of furniture. When I finished, I stood up, bowed politely, and walked away before she could even formulate a gloating response. The rumors started by nightfall. The palace servants whispered that the Crown Prince's shadow dog had finally had his spirit broken. They said the whipping in the dungeon had stolen his soul. They weren't entirely wrong. His soul was gone. Mine was just far too pragmatic to care about imperial drama. I requested to be moved from the adjoining room next to the prince's bedchamber, a privilege the original Shen had treasured more than life, to the outer guard barracks. I submitted the request in writing to the captain of the guard. I cited that my recent injuries made me a liability in close-quarters combat inside the royal chambers, and I needed time to recover in the outer ring. It was a logical, irrefutable military request. The captain approved it. When Prince Li Wei found out, 2 days later, that I was no longer sleeping on the other side of his paper wall, the palace went dead silent. I was sitting in the courtyard of the guard barracks, shirtless, trying to awkwardly apply a medicinal paste to the lash wounds on my shoulder blade. The sun was warm. I had found a stray orange cat wandering near the kitchens, and it was currently asleep on my discarded uniform jacket. For the first time since I woke up in this universe, I felt a small sliver of peace. I was humming a song I remembered from the radio in my past life. Suddenly, the wooden gates of the barracks courtyard were thrown open. Prince Li Wei stood there. He was breathing heavily, his hair slightly disheveled, ignoring the panic of the other guards, who immediately dropped to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the dirt. I stopped humming. I didn't panic. I calmly picked up my uniform jacket, carefully moving the sleepy cat, and slipped it over my shoulders to cover my bandaged back. Then, I walked over and dropped to one knee, bowing my head. "Your Highness," I said smoothly. Li Wei ignored the other guards. He marched directly toward me, grabbing me by the upper arm and hauling me to my feet. His grip was tight enough to bruise. "What is the meaning of this?" he hissed, his voice low and vibrating with a fury I hadn't seen before. "Pardon, Your Highness? I do not understand." "Your quarters. You moved to the outer barracks, without asking me." I looked at him mildly. "I submitted the standard form to the captain, Your Highness. My injuries slowed my reflexes. It is standard protocol for a shadow guard to step back to the outer ring until he is at full operational capacity. I did not want to compromise your safety. It was a perfect excuse. Bulletproof." Li Wei stared at me, his chest heaving slightly. He was searching my face for the lie. He was waiting for me to break down, to cry, to admit that I was doing this to punish him, to make him jealous, to make him realize what he had lost. But I wasn't. I just genuinely wanted to sleep away from his dramatic, incense-choked room. "You do not make decisions about your placement, Shen." "I do," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "I apologize for overstepping, Your Highness," I said evenly, not backing away, but not leaning in either. I was an empty vessel. "Shall I pack my things and return to the inner chambers tonight?" He froze. If I had fought him, if I had argued, he could have yelled. He could have dominated me. But my complete, frictionless compliance left him with nothing to push against. It was like he was punching water. He looked at my face. He looked at my eyes. He was looking for the man who used to look at him like he hung the moon and the stars. He found nothing but polite, professional emptiness. "No," Li Wei finally gritted out, his jaw tight. "Stay here, rot here for all I care, until you learn how to behave like my guard again." "Understood, Your Highness," I said, bowing again. He turned and stormed out of the courtyard. I watched him leave. Then I turned back to my bench, sat down, and the orange cat hopped back onto my lap. I went back to applying my medicine. Weeks turned into months. Spring broke over the imperial city, turning the gardens into an explosion of plum blossoms and cherry wood. My back healed, leaving a network of pale, jagged scars. I trained every morning at dawn. I discovered that the original Shen's body was a lethal weapon. I learned how to use the hidden blades in my sleeves, how to move without making a sound, how to drop my heart rate to conceal my presence. I enjoyed the physical discipline of it. It kept my modern mind grounded. And as for my relationship with the Crown Prince, it became a masterpiece of professional distance. And if you are enjoying this slow burn tension, the unspoken desires, and the cold war of the royal palace, remember, the extended and uncensored 18+ continuation of stories like this is waiting for you on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. The link is in the description and pinned comment. Now, let's get back to the shadows. I returned to my duties at his side, but I was no longer a shadow who yearned for the light. I was just a shadow. When he had banquets, I stood by the door, eyes forward, expressionless. When Lady Hua visited him, hanging off his arm and giggling, I poured their tea with steady, indifferent hands. The original Shen would have shattered a teacup. I just made sure the temperature of the water was optimal for jasmine leaves. And the strange thing was, the more I didn't care, the more Prince Li Wei seemed to lose his mind. It started with small things. He stopped drinking the tea I poured. He would stare at my hands, his eyes tracking the movement of my wrists. He began dismissing Lady Hua early in the evenings, claiming he had paperwork to do. But instead of reading scrolls, he would sit at his desk, staring intensely at where I stood in the corner of the room. He tried to provoke me. He would casually mention other guards he found attractive. I would nod and professionally agree that Commander Chen had an excellent physique for heavy infantry. He would purposely drop his writing brush, expecting me to rush forward to pick it up, brushing my fingers against his, the way the original Shen used to do. I would calmly pick it up, place it on the edge of the desk, and step back. No lingering touches, no stolen glances. It was driving him insane. The climax of this silent, suffocating war came during the Emperor's summer hunt. The imperial family traveled to the northern forests. It was a massive, sprawling event filled with politics, drinking, and horseback riding. I was assigned to ride directly behind Li Wei. The forest was thick, the canopy filtering the sunlight into daggers of green and gold. Li Wei was riding a massive black stallion, his golden archery bracers gleaming. He was in a foul mood. He had been in a foul mood for 3 months. We became separated from the main hunting party when Li Wei decided to chase a silver stag deep into a narrow ravine. I followed him, my senses heightened. The silence in the ravine felt wrong. Too quiet, no birds, no wind. My modern mind analyzed the tactical disadvantage. My ancient muscle memory felt the bloodlust in the air. "Highness, halt," I said sharply, pulling back on my horse's reins. Li Wei turned to glare at me. "Do not command me, Shen." The first arrow struck the tree inches from Li Wei's head. Before the sound of the wood splintering even echoed, I was moving. I kicked off my stirrups, launching myself from my horse and tackling Li Wei off his saddle just as a second arrow zipped through the space where his chest had been a millisecond before. We hit the dirt hard, rolling into the thick ferns at the base of a massive oak tree. "Assassins," I hissed, pressing my hand over Li Wei's mouth to keep him quiet. 5 men dropped from the trees, dressed in dark green, their faces masked, swords drawn. I didn't feel fear. I felt the cold, calculating adrenaline of an emergency room surgeon dealing with a multi-car pileup. Triage, assess the threat, eliminate the danger, keep the patient alive. I drew my twin short swords. "Stay down," I ordered Li Wei, not looking at him. I stepped out from the cover of the tree. The fight was brutal, fast, and entirely silent on my end. The original Shen was a master of the blade, but his emotions always made him reckless. He fought with rage. I fought with anatomy. I knew exactly where arteries were. I knew exactly how much pressure it took to collapse a windpipe. I moved through the assassins like water through jagged rocks. I parried, sidestepped, and delivered fatal, efficient strikes. But there were 5 of them, and I was guarding a target. The last assassin, realizing he was outmatched, made a desperate lunge not for me, but for Li Wei, who was rising from the ferns with his own sword drawn. I threw myself between them. The assassin's blade sliced through the silk of my uniform, cutting a deep gash across my left bicep, right before I buried my dagger into his neck. The man collapsed. The forest went dead silent again. I stood there, my breath slightly elevated, watching the blood drip from my swords onto the moss. I calmly wiped the blades on the dead man's cloak and sheathed them. I turned back to Li Wei. The Crown Prince was staring at me. His face was entirely pale, his dark eyes wide with a terror I had never seen him wear. He wasn't looking at the dead men. He was looking at the blood rapidly soaking the left sleeve of my uniform. "Shen," he choked out, dropping his sword. He stumbled toward me, his hands reaching out, trembling. "Shen, you're bleeding, you're hurt." I looked down at my arm. It stung, but it wasn't arterial. "It is a superficial laceration, Your Highness. The muscle is intact. Are you injured?" "You stepped in front of a blade for me," he whispered, his hands hovering over my bleeding arm, terrified to touch it, terrified to cause me pain. His eyes searched mine, desperate, wild with sudden hope. "You protected me. You still care." He thought this was proof. He thought that because I took a hit for him, the original Shen's desperate love was still alive inside me, buried under layers of hurt, just waiting for him to notice. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the arrogance stripped away. I saw a man who had suddenly realized that the thing he had taken for granted was the only thing keeping him breathing. I saw the panic, the guilt, and the desperate burning obsession that had been growing in him for months, finally bursting to the surface. I felt absolutely nothing for him. "Your Highness," I said smoothly, stepping back so his trembling hands fell to his sides. "I am your shadow guard. The Emperor pays my salary to ensure your pulse continues beating. If I let you die, I would be executed for dereliction of duty." Li Wei froze. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in the dappled forest light. "Duty?" he whispered, the words sounding like ash in his mouth. "Yes, Your Highness. Now, please assist me in signaling the main party. I need to bind this wound before it attracts predators." I didn't wait for his response. I ripped a strip of cloth from the hem of my ruined uniform, wrapped it tightly around my bicep, and tied it off with my teeth and right hand. Li Wei just stood there, staring at me as if I were a stranger who had stolen the face of the man he once knew. Which, technically, was exactly what I was. After the hunt, everything shattered. The political engagement to Lady Hua was abruptly cancelled. The palace was in an uproar. General Hua threatened rebellion, but Li Wei didn't care. He locked himself in his chambers. He refused to see his ministers. He only wanted to see me. He summoned me every hour. He had the royal physicians send the most expensive, rare healing salves for my arm. He fired the eunuch who had spoken poorly to me down in the dungeons months ago. He was trying to rewrite history. He was trying to erase the whip scars on my back with gold and panic. I treated his desperate affection with the same polite, professional distance I always had. One night, a massive thunderstorm rolled over the imperial city. The rain came down in sheets, rattling the paper windows of the prince's bedchamber. I was standing by the door, on duty. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Li Wei was drinking. Not the elegant, measured sipping of a royal, but the heavy, desperate drinking of a man trying to drown a ghost. He was sitting on the floor, his robes unkempt, a jar of wine in his hand. He looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, heavy with exhaustion and something dark and terrifying. "Why won't you look at me?" he asked, his voice raw, barely audible over the thunder. "I am looking at you, Your Highness," I replied, my gaze fixed perfectly on the bridge of his nose. "No, you aren't," he suddenly shouted, hurling the wine jar across the room. It shattered against the wall, ceramic shards and dark red liquid exploding across the floor. I didn't flinch. I just calculated how long it would take the servants to clean it up in the morning. Li Wei pushed himself off the floor. He stumbled toward me, his chest heaving. He stopped inches away, his hands coming up to grip my shoulders. His fingers dug into my uniform, desperate, clinging. "Where did you go, Shen?" he whispered, a tear finally breaking free and tracking down his aristocratic cheek. "Where is the man who used to look at me like I was the only thing in the world? Bring him back, please. I'll do anything. I'll give you anything. Just look at me like that again." He rested his forehead against my chest, right over my heart. He was trembling. The Crown Prince of the Yan Empire, a man feared across the continent, was sobbing into the chest of his guard. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. For the dungeon, for her, for years of being blind. I didn't know the silence would be this loud. I didn't know it would feel like dying." I stood perfectly still. His hair smelled like wine and rain. His body was warm. The vulnerability was profound, raw, and tragically real. If the original Shen were here, this would have been his ultimate victory. The moment he had prayed for, bled for, died for. But he wasn't here. I slowly brought my hands up. Li Wei gasped softly, leaning into my touch, expecting me to hold him, expecting me to forgive him. Instead, I gently, firmly gripped his wrists and pulled his hands off my shoulders. He looked up, his wet eyes wide and devastatingly vulnerable. "Your Highness," I said, my voice soft, but utterly devoid of the one thing he wanted to hear. "You are drunk. You should sleep." The hope in his eyes didn't just break, it pulverized. He stared at me, his mouth open slightly in a silent, agonizing realization. He finally understood. You cannot apologize to a corpse. And the love he had killed in that dungeon was never, ever coming back. He dropped his hands to his sides, stepping back, looking at me like he was drowning, and I was the shore he could never reach. "You really don't feel anything for me anymore, do you?" he whispered. "I feel immense respect for the crown prince of this empire," I recited smoothly. He let out a broken, bitter laugh that sounded like a sob. He turned away, wrapping his arms around himself. "Leave me," he whispered. "As you command, Your Highness." I bowed, turned, and walked out into the corridor. The rain was cold, but the air felt remarkably clean. 3 days later, I submitted my resignation. In the Yan Empire, a shadow guard's contract is exactly 10 years. Most die before it ends. Those who survive usually renew it, having known no other life. The original Shen's 10-year mark had officially arrived. I packed my few belongings in the outer barracks. 2 plain robes, the twin short swords, a small pouch of saved coins, and the little wooden carving of an orange cat I had whittled during my free time. I walked to the main administrative hall to hand in my imperial token. Prince Li Wei was waiting for me. He stood at the end of the grand hall, dressed in his full, terrifyingly beautiful imperial regalia, black silk embroidered with gold dragons, a jade crown in his hair. He looked like a god of war, but his face was gaunt, his eyes rimmed with dark circles. He held my written resignation in his hand. The hall was empty. He had cleared the guards, the eunuchs, Everyone. It was just him and me, and the vast, echoing silence of the marble room. "You are leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "My 10-year contract is fulfilled, Your Highness. I have served the Empire faithfully." "You cannot leave," he said, his voice hard, trying to summon the authority he used to wield over me. "I forbid it. I will double your pay. I will make you commander of the Imperial Army. I will make you my Imperial consort." That last offer would have shattered the Empire's political stability. It was madness. It was a desperate, burning declaration of absolute surrender. I stopped walking. I stood 10 paces away from him. "I do not want to be commander, Your Highness, and I certainly do not want to be a consort." Li Wei's hands shook. He crushed the resignation letter in his fist. He took a step toward me, his facade of authority crumbling instantly. "Then what do you want?" he pleaded, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Tell me what you want, and I will tear the world apart to give it to you. Just don't walk out that door. Please, Shen, don't leave me alone in this palace." I looked at him. I saw the ruin of a proud man. I saw the tragedy of realizing the value of water only after the well has run completely dry. I reached to my waist and untied the black jade token of the Shadow Guard, the token the original Shen had kissed every night before he slept. I walked forward and placed it gently on a small table between us. "What I want, Your Highness," I said quietly, "is to buy a small house near the southern coast. I want to learn how to fish. I want to sit on a porch and drink tea that I don't have to test for poison. I want to live." "You can live here," he begged, tears spilling openly down his face now, completely abandoning his dignity. "I'll keep you safe. I'll love you. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I did to you." I smiled. It was a gentle, sad smile. Not for him, but for the boy who had died in the dark, who would have given his soul to hear those words. "I know you would, Li Wei," I said, using his name for the first and last time. "But the person you want to say that to isn't here anymore. He waited a very long time for you, but he's gone." Li Wei let out a strangled gasp, covering his mouth with his hand as the reality of my words finally, permanently set in. I bowed one last time. A deep, respectful, final bow. I turned around and walked toward the massive wooden doors of the palace. I heard him collapse behind me. I heard his knees hit the marble floor. I heard the devastating, agonizing sound of a man weeping for a ghost he had created himself. I didn't look back. The original Shen had spent his entire life looking at the prince. I was going to look at the world. I pushed the heavy doors open. The morning sun hit my face, warm and golden. The air smelled of distant rain and blooming jasmine. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, walked down the immense stone steps, and stepped out into my new life. The end. If you want the next part, the uncensored continuation, and more unlimited 18+ Ancient Royal BL stories, come join Spicy Ancient BL on Patreon. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next story.